Hey everybody, it's Christian. I wanted to do a video to respond to a critique I got on my first Christian Marxism video from a friend of mine. And this friend basically was saying that the video focused more on like the history of Jesus and of the world than it did on actual Christian Marxism and what that looks like and why it is. So I just want to briefly lay out that side of it, which I neglected in the first video. So my Christian faith, and in my opinion, every true, real, authentic Christian faith should be very heavily based on and focused on the historical Jesus of Nazareth. Now, Jesus of Nazareth was a real person. He lived, and some of his teachings are recorded in the Gospels. So the idea is that you treat the Gospels and the New Testament and the whole Bible as a historical document written by human beings who had their own biases and their own agendas and etc. And through historical and biblical criticism, you can go into there, and using other evidence like archaeology and anthropology, you can get to the historical core that is wrapped up in the Gospels and in the New Testament and in the entire Christian Bible. And different historians will have different reconstructions, is what they call it, of the historical Jesus, and they'll differ from each other quite extensively. I've researched this a lot, and I will do videos and write articles in the future, and I have written articles, maybe I'll link one or two of them, about some of the methods and some of the evidence that I find most compelling, and eventually I do hope to write my own book-length reconstruction of Jesus, of the historical Jesus, but until such time as I'm able to actually do that, my understanding of the historical Jesus is based heavily, not exclusively, and I do have some differences, but it's very heavily based on the Bible scholar John Dominic Crossan, who is a huge influence on me. I've read most of his books. And two books in particular I think are extremely important for understanding his reconstruction, which again is a huge influence on me, although I do have some differences with him, notably on like the issue of violence, certain things like that. But so the books are this one, The Historical Jesus, the Life of a Mediterranean Jewish Peasant, which is a pretty hefty book, and then also this one, which is even bigger, it's just called The Birth of Christianity. I've read both of these books cover to cover multiple times. They are wonderful. They're very dense, unfortunately. They're not something that anyone would most generally want to pick up and just read. But for people who are really interested in that kind of thing, I highly recommend them. He also has shorter, more popular books that are easier for someone who's like more casually interested. But these two books lay out his historical and scholarly evidence, and he paints a picture of a historical Jesus of Nazareth who created a movement based on subverting the cleansing authority of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem through going out into the world and healing people for free. And of course, he has a, it's not like literal miraculous, curing disease. He makes a distinction, and anthropology makes a distinction between disease and illness. And the idea is that although Jesus obviously couldn't cure the physical disease, he couldn't, he didn't have antibiotics or whatever. What he did, and what his followers did, was they would cure the illness, which is based on how society treats you, which is, the Jewish purity codes that existed back then are one example. And then he would also, the feeding of people would go, and he would send out, he and his followers would go out and they would break bread with people, which and Jesus himself serves the food in the Gospels, which is a subversion of the kind of Roman Mediterranean patriarchal structure of how people eat, where the paterfamilias, the head of the household, would eat first, and the women would have to wait, and then the children would have. So it's this whole thing. I don't have time to get into the whole thing, but basically Jesus of Nazareth created this movement of people going out preaching the kingdom of God, and it was a kingdom of God of equality and justice, and Jesus was crucified for it because it was anti-empire, it was anti-imperialist, it was anti-authority, it was anti-money, anti-wealth. Basically, the kingdom of God, which was the central tenet of Jesus's movement. The kingdom of God referred to a future classless, because everything Jesus did emphasized the absolute equality of believers. It was stateless in a sense because it was the kingdom of God and not of any state built by humans. It was moneyless, obviously. So, I mean, it basically, and of course Jesus wouldn't have used this word, but it was basically what Marxists and other communists refer to as a communist society. Stateless, classless, moneyless, equality, just, distributive justice, all that. So for me, all Christian Marxism is this understanding. It's using historical materialism and biblical criticism to analyze the Bible and get this picture of Jesus from it, and then understand that the goals of Marxism and the original goal of the historical Jesus of Nazareth were the same thing. It's basically realizing that Marxist struggle and revolution is how we actually today can bring about the kingdom of God and create that stateless, classless, moneyless society of equality and justice and, liberty, equality, and fraternity. So, I hope that answers the question that my friend had about it, or the issue that my friend had about it. Obviously, this isn't, an apologetic for it. It would take a long time to get into all the historical evidence and then, make the case for the compatibility, and I will do that in the future, but now I'm just explaining that's, to me, what Christian Marxism is. It's also, emulating that praxis that Jesus had of going out, being with the people, doing what basically amounts to, what Maoists might call mass work. Which, is pretty much exactly it. I probably will do another video on similarities between Jesus's movement and modern MLM, Marxist-Leninist, Maoist movements. But anyways, yeah, I hope that was a good kind of explanation of it. Thanks for watching.